"Get out of my house!" Marlowe screamed, her face twisted with rage as she blocked the front door. "This is my inheritance. Go away or I'll call the police." I stood there on my own front porch, keys in my trembling hand, watching my 32-year-old daughter treat me like a stranger. The woman I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for was throwing me out of the house I'd built with my own hands. I turned around, walked to my truck, and dialed a number. Not the police, the realtor. "Oswin, it's Thaddeus. Put the house on the market. Today?" What my daughter didn't know was that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. "Before I begin this story, can you tell me where in the world you're listening from?" I never thought I'd be sitting in my truck outside my own home, talking to a realtor about selling the place where I'd planned to spend my golden years. But Marlowe had pushed me past every limit I thought I had. To understand how we got here, you need to know about the house, about what it meant to our family, about the dreams we built inside those walls. 32 years ago, when Kala was pregnant with Marlowe, we bought a small plot of land on the outskirts of town. I was working construction then, putting in 12-hour days just to make ends meet. Kala was teaching second grade at the elementary school, her belly growing rounder each month as she shaped young minds. We had nothing but love, determination, and a shared vision of building something permanent for our family. The land cost us every penny of our savings. For months, we lived in a tiny apartment above the hardware store downtown, while I spent every weekend and evening after work clearing trees, leveling ground, and laying the foundation. Kala would bring me sandwiches and sit on overturned buckets, reading me baby name books while I mixed concrete by hand. We were young, broke, and completely in love with the future we were creating. I remember the day we poured the foundation. Kala was 8 months pregnant, waddling around the construction site in her oversized overalls, insisting on helping despite my protests. She wanted to leave her handprint in the wet concrete, right next to where the front door would eventually stand. "So our babies will always know they're walking into a home built with love," she said, pressing her palm into the gray mixture. I put my hand next to hers, and we sat there for hours, talking about the life we'd build on that foundation. Marlowe was born 3 weeks later in the county hospital. I held her tiny body against my chest, covered in sawdust and paint stains from rushing straight from the construction site. She was perfect, red-faced and screaming, but perfect. I whispered promises to her that night about the room I was building just for her, with windows facing east so she'd wake up to sunshine every morning. I told her about the swing I'd hang from the oak tree, about the garden where her mother would teach her to grow tomatoes. Building that house took 3 years of backbreaking work. Every board I nailed, every pipe I fitted, every wall I framed was done with my family in mind. I wasn't just constructing a building. I was creating a legacy, a place where holidays would be celebrated, where grandchildren would take their first steps, where Cal and I would grow old together watching sunsets from the front porch. When Boone came along 2 years later, I added a second bedroom, working by lamplight after Kala fell asleep. She was exhausted from teaching and managing 2 babies, but she never complained. She'd bring me coffee and rub my shoulders while I sketched plans for a bigger kitchen, a family room where we could all gather for movie nights. Every improvement was an investment in our future happiness. The neighborhood grew up around us. Young families moved into houses that developers threw up in a matter of months, but ours remained special. Neighbors would stop by to admire the craftsmanship, the custom woodwork, the built-in shelves that perfectly fit our growing collection of family photos. They called it the house that loved, and they weren't wrong. Marlowe and Boone spent their childhood racing through those rooms, sliding down the banister I'd sanded smooth with my own hands, hiding in the reading nook I'd carved out under the stairs. I taught them both how to use tools in the garage workshop, how to plant seeds in Kala's garden, how to fix things instead of throwing them away. Those walls absorbed their laughter, their tears, their growing up dreams. Every payment we made on that land, every improvement we added, every memory we created was an investment in something bigger than ourselves. This wasn't just real estate. This was our family's heart, our identity, our proof that 2 people with more love than money could build something beautiful and lasting. Now, sitting in my truck with the realtor on the phone, I felt like I was about to tear down everything we'd spent a lifetime building. But Marlowe had left me no choice. The daughter who'd grown up in rooms built with love had forgotten where that love came from. The first signs that something was wrong with Marlowe started showing up about 5 years ago, right after she graduated college. She'd moved back home temporarily while job hunting, which Kala and I welcomed with open arms. We'd missed having our children around, missed the energy and laughter they brought to the house, but temporary stretched into months, then years, and Marlowe's attitude shifted from grateful to demanding. It began with small things. Comments about how outdated the kitchen looked, how embarrassing it was to bring friends over to such an old-fashioned house. She started rearranging furniture without asking, throwing away family photos she considered clutter, and complaining that her childhood bedroom was too small for a professional woman. I watched my daughter look at our home, our life's work, like it was some kind of prison holding her back from her true potential. Kala tried to excuse it as adjustment anxiety, the natural growing pains of an adult child finding her place in the world. But I saw something darker growing in Marlowe's eyes. Resentment, impatience, a sense of entitlement that made my stomach turn. She'd started treating our house like a free hotel, coming and going without explanation, bringing strangers around at all hours, leaving messes for her mother to clean up. The job hunting excuse wore thin when we discovered she was turning down interviews that didn't meet her standards. Marketing coordinator for an insurance company. She'd scoff, tossing rejection letters in the trash. I have a communications degree from State University. I deserve better than some dead-end office job. Meanwhile, Kala was still getting up before dawn to teach 25 second graders, and I was pushing my aging body through construction work that got harder every year. Boone, on the other hand, had moved out right after high school, got his electrician's certification, and was building his own life with quiet determination. He'd stop by for Sunday dinners, always bringing flowers for his mother and asking how he could help around the house. The contrast between my children couldn't have been sharper. One had learned the value of hard work and gratitude. The other seemed to believe the world owed her everything she wanted. The conversations about inheritance started casually. Marlowe would make comments about when this place is mine, or ask detailed questions about property values and our retirement plans. At first, Kala and I assumed it was natural curiosity about family finances. We'd always been open with our children about money, teaching them to budget and save, showing them that security comes from careful planning and honest work. But Marlowe's questions became more persistent, more specific. She wanted to know exactly how much the house was worth, what our will said, whether we'd considered selling and giving her and Boone their inheritance early. You could downsize to a condo, she'd suggest. Her voice casual but her eyes intense. Use the equity to enjoy your retirement. Boone and I could split the difference and really start our adult lives. I explained the house wasn't just an investment to cash out. It was our home, the place where we'd planned to age in place, where we wanted to host family gatherings for decades to come, where our future grandchildren would spend holidays and summers. Marlowe would nod politely, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes, calculating and planning. The pressure intensified when she started bringing home real estate flyers, articles about senior living communities, brochures for retirement villages. Look how nice these places are, she'd say, spreading glossy photos across our kitchen table. Maintenance-free living, social activities, medical care on site. Wouldn't that be so much easier than rattling around in this big old house? Kala finally lost her patience during one of these conversations. This big old house is our home. Marlowe, the home your father built for our family. We're not ready to leave it, and we may never be ready. You need to build your own life instead of planning ours. Marlowe's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath her concerned daughter act. That's when the real manipulation began. Marlowe started pointing out every maintenance issue, every sign of aging in our 50-year-old bodies, every indication that we might not be capable of managing the house much longer. A loose floorboard became a safety hazard. A clogged gutter became evidence of our declining abilities. A power outage during a storm became proof that we needed to move somewhere with backup generators and 24-hour staff. She began inviting herself to our doctor's appointment, claiming she was worried about our health but really fishing for information about our long-term prognosis. She researched our property taxes, our insurance costs, our utility bills, building a case that maintaining the house was becoming financially irresponsible. Every conversation became a subtle argument for why we should sell and why she should benefit from that decision. The breaking point came when we discovered she'd been showing the house to strangers, claiming she was helping her elderly parents explore their options. A neighbor called to ask if we were really planning to sell, mentioning that they'd seen people taking photos of our property and measuring the yard. When we confronted Marlowe, she acted innocent and concerned, insisting she was just being proactive about our future. That night, Kala cried herself to sleep in my arms. How did we raise a daughter who sees dollar signs when she looks at our home? She whispered. I held her close, feeling the weight of our failure as parents, wondering where we'd gone wrong in teaching our children about love, family, and what really matters in life. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in the garage, restoring an old rocking chair that had belonged to Kala's grandmother, when my cell phone buzzed. The caller ID showed First National Bank, and for a moment, my heart stopped. At our age, unexpected calls from financial institutions never brought good news. Mr. Thaddeus, this is Jennifer from First National. I'm calling about some unusual activity on your account. We have some concerns about potential fraud. My hands went cold as I set down my sandpaper. Jennifer explained that someone had been attempting to access our account information, claiming to be calling on behalf of elderly relatives who needed help managing their finances. The blood drained from my face as the pieces clicked together. Can you tell me what information they were trying to access? I asked, already knowing the answer would gut me. Jennifer explained that the caller had provided enough personal information to pass initial security checks, asking about account balances, recent transactions, and whether there were any investment accounts or CDs that might need management assistance. I hung up and immediately called our credit card companies, our investment advisor, and our insurance agent. Each conversation revealed the same pattern. Someone claiming to be Marlo, calling on behalf of her aging parents, fishing for financial information. Someone who knew our social security numbers, our birth dates, our account numbers. Someone who had access to our personal documents. That afternoon, while Marlo was out, I went through her room for the first time since she'd moved back home. Hidden under her mattress, I found photocopies of our bank statements, our tax returns, our insurance policies, a notebook filled with calculations about property values and inheritance taxes, contact information for estate lawyers and financial advisors. My daughter had been planning our financial future without our knowledge or consent, but the worst discovery was still to come. Buried in her desk drawer, I found collection notices, credit card bills with balances in the tens of thousands, letters from law firms threatening legal action for unpaid debts, payment plans for gambling debts that made my stomach turn. Marlo wasn't just planning to inherit our house. She was desperate for it. The paperwork painted a devastating picture of my daughter's real life. She'd been living on credit cards for years, funding a lifestyle she couldn't afford while pretending to job hunt. She'd maxed out multiple cards on clothes, electronics, expensive dinners, and weekend trips to casinos. She owed money to people who didn't take no for an answer, and the interest was compounding faster than she could handle. One letter particularly caught my attention. It was from a lawyer representing certain creditors who were prepared to explore all legal options for debt recovery. The language was polite, but the threat was clear. Marlo was in serious trouble with some seriously dangerous people. I sat in her room, surrounded by evidence of her deception, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. This wasn't the daughter we'd raised. This wasn't the little girl who used to help me in the workshop, who'd learned to change oil in the garage, who'd written thank you notes for every birthday gift she'd ever received. This was someone who'd been lying to us for years, manipulating our love while planning to cash in our dreams. When Kala came home from school that afternoon, I showed her everything. We sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of family meals, and went through the evidence of our daughter's betrayal. Kala kept shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "How did we not know?" over and over again. The math was simple and heartbreaking. Marlo owed over $60,000 to various creditors. Her minimum monthly payments exceeded what most families spent on rent. She had no income, no real job prospects, and no way to dig herself out of the hole she'd created. Our house, with its paid-off mortgage and decades of equity, was her only lifeline. That evening, we called Boone and asked him to come over. We laid out the situation honestly, showing him the same documents we'd discovered. His reaction was immediate and clear. "She's been planning to force you out of your own home." He looked around the kitchen where he'd grown up, his jaw clenched with anger. "She's been pretending to care about your future while setting you up to lose everything." Boone helped us understand the bigger picture. Marlo wasn't just hoping we'd sell the house and share the proceeds. She was maneuvering to get power of attorney, to convince courts that we were too elderly to manage our own affairs, to take control of our assets while we were still alive. The doctor's appointments, the research into senior living, the concern about our ability to maintain the house. It was all part of a long-term plan to separate us from our property. We spent that night making plans of our own. We moved all our important documents to a safe deposit box. We added passwords to all our financial accounts. We scheduled appointments with an estate lawyer to make sure our will was ironclad and couldn't be contested. We were preparing for war with our own daughter. The saddest part was realizing how long the manipulation had been going on. Years of comments about our age, our health, our ability to handle responsibilities. It had all been psychological warfare designed to make us doubt ourselves. Marlowe had been systematically undermining our confidence while positioning herself as our savior, but we weren't the helpless elderly people she'd been painting us as. At 63 and 58, we were healthy, sharp, and perfectly capable of managing our own lives. We'd been building, planning, and problem-solving for decades. Our daughter had underestimated us, and she was about to learn that we hadn't survived this long by being naive or weak. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening in April. Kala and I had spent 3 weeks preparing, consulting with lawyers, organizing our finances, and steeling ourselves for what we knew would be the most difficult conversation of our lives. We decided to approach it directly, laying out everything we'd discovered and giving Marlowe one chance to come clean and ask for help the right way. She walked into the kitchen after another day of job hunting that we now knew was actually gambling and shopping. Her designer purse, which I now realized had cost more than most people's monthly salary, hit the counter with an expensive thud. She was scrolling through her phone, probably checking credit card balances or casino promotions, when she noticed the documents spread across our kitchen table. "What's all this?" she asked. But her voice had already changed. The casual tone disappeared, replaced by something wary and defensive. She could see our bank statements, her credit card bills, the collection notices, all organized in neat piles like evidence in a courtroom. Her face went pale as she realized her secret life had been exposed. "Sit down, Marlowe," I said, my voice steady despite the heartbreak crushing my chest. "We need to talk about your debts, your lies, and your plans for our house." She remained standing, her hands gripping the back of the chair so tightly her knuckles went white. The mask she'd been wearing for years was finally starting to slip. Kala spoke first, her teacher's voice calm but firm. "We know about the gambling, honey. We know about the credit cards, the collection agencies, the people you owe money to. We know you've been planning to force us out of our home to pay your debts." Each word hit Marlowe like a physical blow, and I watched my daughter's face cycle through emotions: shock, denial, anger, and finally, desperate calculation. "You don't understand," she started, her voice rising. "Those debts aren't what you think. I had some medical expenses, some business investments that didn't work out. I was going to tell you, but I didn't want you to worry." The lies came easily, practiced and smooth, but they couldn't explain away the evidence we'd found. The casino receipts, the luxury purchases, the deliberate deception. I stood up and walked to her, my heart breaking as I looked into the eyes of the little girl I'd taught to ride a bike, to tie her shoes, to treat people with respect and honesty. "Marlowe, we found the notebook. We know you've been calculating the house's value, researching power of attorney laws, calling our banks and pretending to be concerned about our mental capacity. This isn't about medical expenses or bad investments. This is about you planning to steal our home." That's when she exploded. Years of careful manipulation gave way to raw desperation and rage. "Steal your home? This house is going to be mine anyway. You're both getting old. You can't take care of this place forever. And I'm drowning here. I need help. And you're sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity while I'm about to lose everything." The entitlement in her voice was staggering. She genuinely believed that our life's work, our security, our home existed primarily to solve her problems. She couldn't understand why we wouldn't sacrifice our future to bail her out of consequences she'd created for herself. Kala tried reasoning with her. "If you'd come to us honestly, if you'd asked for help instead of trying to manipulate us, we might have found a way to help you. But you chose to lie, to scheme, to treat us like obstacles instead of your parents who love you." But Marlowe was past listening. She was cornered, desperate, and dangerous. "Help me?" She laughed bitterly. "With what? Your teacher's pension and construction workers' savings? You don't have enough liquid cash to make a dent in what I owe. But this house, this land, this equity that's just sitting here doing nothing, that could solve everything. I could pay off my debts, start fresh, maybe even have enough left to help you find a nice retirement community. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized how completely she'd objectified us. We weren't her parents anymore. We were obstacles standing between her and a pile of money. This house isn't just sitting here doing nothing, Marlo, it's our home. It's where we live, where we want to stay, where we've built our life together. It's not your emergency fund. That's when she said the words that ended our relationship forever. You're being selfish. You're old. You probably won't live more than 10 or 15 more years anyway. And you're hoarding wealth while your own daughter suffers. What kind of parents choose a house over their child's welfare? The silence that followed was deafening. Kala was crying silently, her shoulders shaking with grief. I stood there looking at this stranger who'd replaced my daughter, feeling something die inside my chest. She'd reduced our lives, our dreams, our future to an inconvenient obstacle to her financial recovery. Get out, I said quietly. The words came from somewhere deep and final. Get out of our house right now. Marlo's face twisted with disbelief, then fury. You can't throw me out. I live here. This is my home too. No, I said, my voice getting stronger. This is our home. You've been living here as our guest, and that invitation is permanently revoked. Pack your things and leave, tonight. She started screaming then, calling us selfish, heartless, cruel. She threatened to call Adult Protective Services, to have us declared incompetent, to fight any attempt to remove her from the property. That's when she ran to the front door, blocking it with her body, and screamed the words that sealed her fate. Go away, or I'll call the police. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. She was calling the police on us, in our own home, to protect her right to manipulate and steal from us. I walked past her, got in my truck, and called Oswin the Realtor. If my daughter wanted to treat our home like nothing more than a pile of money, then that's exactly what it would become. If she couldn't see the love and sacrifice that had built these walls, then she didn't deserve to inherit them. The for sale sign went up on a Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, our neighborhood looked like a crime scene. Cars moved slowly past our house, neighbors standing in clusters on sidewalks, everyone trying to figure out what had happened to the family that had been the heart of this community for 3 decades. My phone started ringing before noon and didn't stop until I finally turned it off that evening. Marlo had spent the night at a motel, but she was back by 8 a.m., pacing around our front yard like a caged animal. She kept taking pictures of the real estate sign, making phone calls, and stopping neighbors to tell them some story about elderly parents making rash decisions. I watched her from our living room window. This woman, who used to be my daughter, working the crowd like a politician trying to build support for her cause. Kala was in the kitchen, mechanically washing dishes that were already clean, her way of coping with stress since the children were small. Maybe we're making a mistake, she said for the 10th time that morning. Maybe there's another way to handle this. But I could see in her eyes that she knew better. Marlo had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Trust, once broken this completely, couldn't be repaired with good intentions and family therapy. Boone arrived around 10, taking a personal day from his electrical job to help us navigate the chaos. He took one look at Marlo working the neighbors and shook his head. She's telling people you're having some kind of breakdown, he reported, that you're making irrational decisions because of grief or dementia or medication side effects. She's painting herself as the concerned daughter trying to protect her confused parents. The lies were so elaborate, so detailed, that I almost admired her creativity. According to Marlo's version of events, I'd become obsessed with selling the house after a minor health scare that had scrambled my thinking. Kala was supposedly too passive to stand up to my confused decision-making. The gambling debts, the manipulation, the years of planning to force us out. None of that existed in her alternative reality. Our first potential buyers came that afternoon. Oswin had warned us that the house would generate significant interest because of its location, condition, and price point. What he hadn't prepared us for was Marlo's interference. She positioned herself at the edge of our property, intercepting potential buyers before they could reach the front door. I watched from inside as she approached a young couple looking at the listing on their phone. She introduced herself as the daughter, explained that her elderly parents were making an impulsive decision they'd regret, and suggested the buyers look at other properties in the neighborhood. When that couple left without viewing the house, I realized we had a serious problem. Osman arrived for the second showing of the day looking frazzled and apologetic. I've never dealt with anything like this, he admitted, glancing toward Marlowe, who was now holding a handwritten sign reading Family Emergency. Please respect our privacy. She'd turned our home sale into a public spectacle, complete with performance art designed to make us look unstable. Can we get a restraining order? Kala asked, but Boone shook his head. She's not threatening violence, and she's not actually on your property. She's standing on public sidewalk exercising her right to free speech. The system that was supposed to protect us was protecting her right to sabotage our decisions. The third potential buyer of the day was a middle-aged man looking to downsize after his divorce. Marlowe's approach to him was different, more sophisticated. She painted herself as a real estate professional trying to help her parents through a difficult transition. She suggested he wait a few months until the family situation stabilized, hinting that a better price might be available if her parents came to their senses. That evening, Osman called with the news I'd been dreading. 2 of today's 3 potential buyers have decided to look elsewhere. They're concerned about family drama, potential legal complications, and whether the sale will actually go through. Word is starting to spread in the real estate community that this property comes with complications. Marlowe had found the perfect way to torture us. She couldn't legally stop us from selling the house, but she could make the process so difficult, so public, and so complicated that no reasonable buyer would want to get involved. She was holding our home hostage using social pressure and implied legal threats. That night, neighbors started stopping by with casseroles and concerned questions. They'd known our family for decades, had watched our children grow up, had celebrated holidays and weathered storms with us. Now they were confused and worried, trying to figure out how to help without taking sides in what appeared to be a family crisis. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought homemade soup and stayed for an hour, gently probing about our decision to sell. It's just so sudden, she said, patting Kala's hand. You've always said you'd never leave this house. Marlowe seems so worried about you both. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing in the minds of people who'd known us for 30 years. By Sunday, the story had spread throughout our church community, during coffee hour after service. I found myself defending our mental capacity, our decision-making ability, and our right to sell our own property. People who'd respected us for decades were looking at us with pity and concern, wondering if we'd lost our minds or fallen victim to some kind of scam. Marlowe had weaponized our community against us. She'd turned our neighbors into unwitting allies in her campaign to keep us trapped in a house we could no longer enjoy because of her presence. Every familiar face now carried questions about our competence, our judgment, our family stability. But the worst part was watching Kala begin to doubt herself. Maybe we are being too hasty, she said that Sunday evening. Maybe we should try family counseling, or give Marlowe more time to find a job, or figure out some other way to help her. The manipulation was working, even on the woman who'd discovered the extent of Marlowe's deception. I held my wife that night and made a decision that would change everything. If Marlowe wanted to make this a public battle, then I'd give her a war she wasn't prepared to fight. I'd stop trying to protect her reputation and start telling the truth about why we were selling. The next morning, I called our lawyer and asked a simple question. What would it take to expose everything? On Monday morning, a black sedan pulled into our driveway, and out stepped a couple who looked like they meant business. The woman wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase, while the man had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making big decisions quickly. They walked past Marlowe's impromptu protest station without acknowledgement, heading straight for our front door with purpose. Marlowe tried her usual interception routine, but the woman simply held up a hand and said, "We're not interested in family drama. We're here to see the house." Something about her tone suggested these weren't people who could be easily manipulated or deterred by sidewalk theatrics. They had the air of professionals who dealt with complicated situations before. Oswin arrived moments later, looking more optimistic than he had in days. "These are the Carvers," he explained as we met them in our foyer. "They're relocating from Seattle for Dr. Carver's medical practice. They've been looking for exactly this type of property." Dr. Sarah Carver shook our hands with the firm grip of someone accustomed to life and death decisions, while her husband Marcus explained his work in pharmaceutical research. As we toured the house, I watched the Carvers take in details that other buyers had missed. Dr. Carver appreciated the wide doorways and accessible layout, noting that the house would work well for aging in place or accommodating mobility issues. Marcus admired the craftsmanship, running his hands along the custom woodwork and asking technical questions about the foundation, the electrical, and the plumbing. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," Dr. Carver said as we stood in the kitchen where I'd had my confrontation with Marlowe just days earlier. "The bones of this house are solid. The location is perfect for my commute to the medical center, and we can see the love that's been invested in every detail." Her words felt like validation after days of having our home treated like a commodity or a problem to be solved. When we moved to the backyard, I pointed out the garden beds where Kala had grown vegetables for 3 decades, the workshop where I'd taught both children to use tools, the oak tree where a rope swing had once hung. Marcus understood immediately. "You built this as a forever home," he said. "Not as a question but as recognition. This isn't just real estate to you." Through the kitchen window, we could see Marlowe pacing around the front yard, periodically taking photos of the Carver's car and making phone calls. Dr. Carver noticed too. "That's your daughter?" she asked gently. When I nodded, she continued, "I see this sometimes in my practice. Family members who have trouble accepting changes in family dynamics. Is she the reason you're selling?" For the first time in weeks, I felt safe enough to tell the truth. I explained about the gambling debts, the manipulation, the attempts to force us out of our own home. I showed them copies of the documents we'd found, the evidence of years of planning to separate us from our property. Dr. Carver listened with the clinical attention of someone accustomed to assessing complex situations quickly. "So this isn't a case of elderly parents making an impulsive decision," Marcus said. "This is a case of adult children trying to force a premature inheritance." His understanding felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. Finally, someone saw the situation clearly, without the filter of Marlowe's manipulation. Dr. Carver made an offer on the spot. Full asking price. Cash transaction. 30-day closing. "We understand family complications," she explained. "We've dealt with similar situations in our own families. This house deserves owners who will appreciate what you've built here, and you deserve to move forward with your lives without interference." As Oswin drew up the paperwork, Marcus asked about our plans after the sale. "We haven't figured that out yet," Kala admitted. "This all happened so fast. We've been focused on getting away from the situation rather than planning what comes next." Dr. Carver exchanged a look with her husband, then made a suggestion that caught us completely off guard. "We have a guest house on our property in Seattle that we've been trying to rent to the right tenants," she said. "It's small but comfortable, perfect for a couple looking to start over. If you're interested in relocating, we'd be happy to discuss a lease arrangement. Consider it a way for all of us to help each other." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Kala started crying right there at our kitchen table. After weeks of feeling trapped and isolated, strangers were offering us not just a way out, but a path forward. The universe had sent us exactly the people we needed, when we needed them most. But Marlowe wasn't finished fighting. When she saw Oswin and the Carvers shaking hands on our front porch, she approached them one final time. This time, her tactics were more aggressive. She claimed the sale was fraudulent, that we were being taken advantage of, that the buyers should contact our lawyer before proceeding. She threatened to file lawsuits, contest the sale, to make their lives miserable if they insisted on stealing her family's home. Dr. Carver listened politely, then responded with the calm authority of someone who'd dealt with difficult people her entire career. "Ma'am, we've done our due diligence. We've spoken with your parents at length, reviewed all the documentation, and consulted with our attorney. This is a legitimate sale between consenting adults. If you continue to harass us or interfere with this transaction, we'll be forced to involve law enforcement." Marlowe's face went white as she realized she was dealing with people who couldn't be intimidated or manipulated. These weren't confused elderly parents or sympathetic neighbors. These were professionals who understood exactly what was happening and refused to be drawn into her drama. That evening, as we signed the purchase agreement, Boone stopped by to hear the news. "I'm proud of you both," he said, hugging his mother tightly. "You're choosing your own future instead of letting Marlowe choose it for you." He looked around the kitchen one last time, then added, "This house will be beautiful with new people who appreciate it, and you'll be beautiful somewhere new, starting fresh." For the first time in months, I felt hope instead of heartbreak. We were selling our house, but we were buying our freedom. We were leaving the place where we'd raised our family, but we were saving ourselves from a daughter who'd lost sight of what family really meant. The closing was scheduled for 3 weeks away, just enough time to pack a lifetime of memories and prepare for the next chapter of our lives. 3 days before closing, Marlowe played her last card. She arrived at our house with a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as attorney Richard Blackwell, specializing in elder law and family disputes. They'd clearly rehearsed their approach, presenting themselves as concerned professionals trying to prevent a tragedy rather than as desperate debtors making one final attempt at manipulation. Blackwell's strategy was sophisticated and terrifying. He suggested that our sudden decision to sell indicated possible cognitive decline, that the stress of family conflict might have impaired our judgment, and that a responsible court might want to evaluate our mental capacity before allowing such a significant financial transaction to proceed. He'd brought paperwork to request a competency hearing, effectively freezing the sale until a judge could determine whether we were capable of making our own decisions. "This is for your own protection," Marlowe said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Dad, you've been acting erratically, making impulsive decisions, refusing to listen to family who care about you. Mr. Blackwell thinks a court-appointed guardian might help you think through this decision more carefully." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. She was trying to have us declared incompetent to prevent us from escaping her control. Calla's face went pale as the implications sank in. If a judge bought into Marlowe's narrative, we could lose the right to make decisions about our own lives, our own property, our own future. A court-appointed guardian would have the power to cancel the sale, force us to remain in a house that had become a prison, and leave us vulnerable to years more of Marlowe's financial pressure. But we weren't the helpless elderly people Marlowe had been painting us as, and we'd spent 3 weeks preparing for exactly this scenario. I smiled as I pulled out my phone and made a call. "Neoma, it's Thaddeus. They're here with the competency threat. Time to activate our insurance policy." Neoma Winters, our attorney, arrived within 20 minutes. Accompanied by Dr. Patricia Reeves, the geriatric psychiatrist we'd been consulting since the crisis began. Behind them came Boone, carrying a briefcase full of documents we'd been compiling for weeks. Marlowe's confident expression began to falter as she realized we'd anticipated her move. Dr. Reeves had conducted comprehensive cognitive assessments on both Calla and me the previous week. She presented test results showing that our mental capacity was not only intact, but superior to average for our age group. Our decision-making ability, memory function, and judgment were all within completely normal ranges. We'd been proactive in protecting ourselves against exactly the accusations Marlowe was now making. Neoma laid out our counterattack with surgical precision. She presented bank records showing that we'd been managing our finances independently and responsibly for decades. She showed employment records proving our continued professional competence. She displayed character references from colleagues, neighbors, and community members who could attest to our mental clarity and sound judgment. Then came the evidence that destroyed Marlowe's credibility completely. Neoma had copies of all the collection notices, credit card statements, and gambling debts we'd discovered. She'd documented every lie Marlowe had told, every manipulation she'd attempted, every instance of identity theft and fraud she'd committed while accessing our financial information. Attorney Blackwell's face grew increasingly pale as he realized his client had omitted crucial information about her own criminal behavior. "Your daughter owes over $60,000 to various creditors," Neoma explained to Blackwell. "She's been living in your client's home rent-free while deliberately sabotaging their attempts to downsize and move forward with their retirement plans. She's contacted their financial institutions using fraudulent information, researched guardianship laws as a means of gaining control over their assets, and is now attempting to use the court system to prevent them from making legal decisions about their own property." Blackwell began gathering his papers, clearly recognizing that his client had misrepresented the situation completely. "If you proceed with this competency challenge," Neoma continued, "we'll file counter-charges for elder financial abuse, identity theft, and attempted fraud. We have enough evidence to pursue criminal charges that could result in significant jail time." Marlowe's mask finally fell away completely. Gone was the concerned daughter act, replaced by raw desperation and fury. "You can't do this to me," she screamed. "I'm your daughter. I'm family. You're supposed to help me, not destroy me." The entitlement was staggering even now. as if her biological relationship gave her the right to steal our home and control our lives. We offered to help you, Kala said quietly. We would have found a way to support you if you'd come to us honestly, if you'd asked for help instead of trying to take our home by force. But you chose manipulation over honesty, theft over trust. You made yourself our enemy instead of our daughter. Blackwell was already heading for the door, unwilling to be associated with a case that had criminal implications for his client. Marlowe chased after him, begging him to stay, promising to pay his fees somehow, insisting that her parents were lying about her character, but it was too late. Her final gambit had failed, and everyone in the room could see her for what she really was. Dr. Reeves spoke to Marlowe directly, her voice compassionate but firm. You're exhibiting signs of pathological gambling addiction combined with narcissistic entitlement syndrome. These are treatable conditions, but only if you acknowledge the problem and commit to genuine recovery. Your parents love you, but they can't help you until you stop trying to victimize them. After they left, our house felt different. The weight of months of fear and uncertainty had lifted, replaced by something that felt like peace. We'd faced the worst Marlowe could throw at us and emerged stronger, more united, and more certain than ever that we were making the right decision. The closing was 2 days away, and nothing could stop it now. We'd won the war for our own freedom, but the victory felt hollow. In saving ourselves, we'd lost our daughter, perhaps forever. Some battles are worth fighting even when winning feels like losing everything that matters. The closing took place on a Thursday morning in May, exactly 6 weeks after Marlowe had screamed at us to leave our own home. Kala and I sat at a conference table in the attorney's office, signing papers that transferred ownership of our life's work to people who would appreciate and protect it. Dr. and Mrs. Carver sat across from us, treating the transaction with the respect and gravity it deserved. As I signed the deed transfer, I thought about the day 32 years earlier when Kala and I had pressed our handprints into wet concrete, dreaming about the life we'd build on that foundation. We'd succeeded beyond our wildest dreams, creating not just a house but a home, not just a structure but a legacy. The fact that our daughter couldn't see that value didn't diminish what we'd accomplished. Marlowe didn't appear at the closing. She'd made one final attempt the night before, calling to promise she'd change, insisting she could get help for her gambling addiction, begging us to give her another chance. But trust, once shattered so completely, couldn't be rebuilt with promises and tears. She'd had years to come to us honestly, and she'd chosen deception every time. The check we received represented more than money. It represented freedom from manipulation, escape from a toxic situation, and the resources to build something new. Dr. Carver had been true to her word about the guest house in Seattle, and we'd accepted her offer of a 1-year lease with an option to buy. At our age, starting over felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Boone helped us pack the moving truck, carefully wrapping family photos and the tools I'd used to build our house. He'd taken a week off work to help with the transition, and his steady presence reminded us that we hadn't failed completely as parents. One of our children had learned the values we'd tried to teach: integrity, hard work, family loyalty, and the difference between helping someone and enabling their destructive behavior. Are you angry at her? Boone asked as we loaded my workshop equipment. It was a question I'd been asking myself for weeks. No, I realized as I said it. I'm heartbroken, but not angry. Anger requires expecting better. I've accepted that the daughter we raised doesn't exist anymore, maybe never existed. The person living in her body made choices that led here. Our neighbors came to say goodbye, many of them still confused about our sudden departure, but gradually understanding that family situations could be more complicated than they appeared from the outside. Mrs. Patterson brought cookies for our trip, and Mr. Jenkins helped carry boxes, both of them tactfully avoiding questions about Marlowe's absence from the moving process. The last thing I loaded was Kala's grandmother's rocking chair, the one I'd been restoring when this crisis began. It seemed fitting somehow, carrying forward something precious from the past while moving toward an uncertain future. Some things were worth saving, worth fighting for, worth taking along when everything else had to be left behind. As we drove away from the house for the final time, Kala took my hand and squeezed it. Do you think we'll ever see her again? She asked, watching our old neighborhood disappear in the rearview mirror. I hope so, I said honestly, but only if she finds her way back to being the person we thought we raised. The woman who threatened to call the police on her own parents isn't someone I recognize. The drive to Seattle took 3 days, and we used the time to talk about our dreams for this next chapter. We wanted to travel, to volunteer, to pursue hobbies we'd postponed while raising children and building careers. We wanted to make new friends who knew us as we were now, not as we'd been when we were younger and more trusting. We wanted to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than biological obligation. The guest house Dr. Carver had offered was small but perfect, with a view of mountains and water that took our breath away. It came furnished with the basics, giving us time to decide what kind of life we wanted to create without the weight of accumulated possessions. For the first time in years, we felt light, unburdened, free to choose our own path. 6 months later, we received a letter from Marlo. She'd entered a residential treatment program for gambling addiction and was working with a therapist to understand the choices that had led to our estrangement. She apologized for the pain she'd caused, acknowledged the reality of her behavior, and asked for nothing except our willingness to read her words. It was a start, though trust would be a long time coming. Boone visited us for Christmas, marveling at our new surroundings and the peace he saw in our faces. "You look 10 years younger," he told us over dinner. Moving here was the right choice. He was right. The stress lines that had appeared during Marlowe's campaign against us had faded, replaced by the relaxed expressions of people who'd reclaimed control over their own lives. As I write this story, Kala and I are planning to buy the guest house we've been renting. We're putting down roots again, but this time on our own terms, with our eyes wide open about human nature and family loyalty. We've learned that love isn't enough to save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destruction. The house we built with our hands became the house that taught us about boundaries. The daughter we raised with love became the teacher who showed us the difference between family and relatives. The crisis that nearly destroyed us became the catalyst for a better, more honest life. Some foundations have to be abandoned to build something stronger. Some families have to be redefined to survive. Some love has to include the courage to say no, to walk away, to choose your own welfare over someone else's manipulation. We're older now, maybe wiser, definitely more careful about who we trust with our hearts. But we're also free, together, and building something new on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom. And that feels like a pretty good place to start the rest of our lives. Before I finish, can you tell me where in the world you're listening to this story from? I'd love to know if these lessons about family, boundaries, and new beginnings resonate with people everywhere, or if this is uniquely American struggle of balancing love with self-preservation.